talking about chapter 23, section 3. And the title of this is Napoleon Forges an Empire. This is Napoleon Bonaparte, a true military genius, seized power in France during this chaotic time and declared himself emperor of all of France. Well, Napoleon was born in Corsica, attended military school there, joined the army as soon as he could, and in 1795, he was already a part of the French Revolution, and he had already allied himself to the new government. And in fact, as head of the military, he defeated a group of royalist rebels that were attacking the National Convention. He was extremely popular as a victorious military leader. Remember that after the French Revolution, many countries declared war on France because they've now thrown out their monarchy, and all of the different countries that have monarchies have now declared war. And so it's Napoleon's job to defend France against all these different countries. And he's kicking butt. He wins in Italy. He conquers in Egypt. He goes on to become an extremely successful general. Even when he's losing, he makes sure that news doesn't make it back home. And so people just think this guy is invincible. And so in November of 1799, he carried out a coup d'etat, which means that he seized power. He threw out the directory, the executive, and had himself declared emperor. And so now Emperor Napoleon, in charge of the military, in charge of the civilian government, now faces the task of defeating all of these forces that have ganged up against France. And he does. He beats the British, the Russians, the Austrians. He's unstoppable. And so, under Napoleon's leadership, a new constitution is approved through a direct vote of the people. The French term there is plebiscite. A direct vote of the people approves the new constitution. And so Napoleon now has broad executive powers. To fix the economy, he set up a national bank, an efficient system for collecting taxes. He also established a public school system to train young people to be equipped for the workforce, but also to create and train officials for his new government. He signed an agreement with the Catholic Church, restoring Catholicism in France, called a concordat. He created a uniform system of laws that would apply equally to all French citizens, called the Napoleonic Code. In fact, it eliminated many injustices. It promoted order and individual rights, which had previously been restricted under the Jacobins, under the Reign of Terror. And so many consider Napoleon a hero, a champion of democracy. I mean, you saw the general there called it liberty under Napoleon. But the irony, like the other perspective, is that he's a dictator. He crowned himself Emperor of France in 1804. Here's Napoleon at his coronation, crowning himself, by the way.
Although France is less than twice the size of Colorado, it is one of the largest countries in Western Europe. It is bordered by Spain, Switzerland, Italy, Germany, and Belgium. The Atlantic Ocean, the Mediterranean Sea, and the English Channel are also on the French border. For more than 300 years, the power of the French king was absolute. This meant that he had the power to do anything. By the summer of 1789, the French people were ready for change. The people demanded equal rights and more power to govern themselves. But when the king refused to grant equal rights to all French people, he and his family were imprisoned in their own palace, and a representative government made up of French citizens, called the National Constituent Assembly, began running the country in his place. Without a king, multiple governments and factions were able to seize power. One of the people who rose to power during these turbulent times was a man named Napoleon Bonaparte. Napoleon fought many battles for the new French government, and he was able to add about 9,000 square miles to French territory in only 1 year. He finally returned to lead the French people in a revolt against their new government on September 4, 1797. He became the leader of France on November 9, 1799. As leader, Napoleon kept Paris the center of France's government. He also created the Bank of France and the Napoleonic Code, the first modern set of laws in France made without a king. Napoleon wanted to rule all of Europe and beyond. His first step was to make himself Emperor of France on December 2, 1804. Next, he would lead an army of 600,000 soldiers into Eastern Europe and destroy anyone who stood in his way. In June 1812, the army started marching toward Russia. The French emperor planned to add Russia to his empire. But the winter months were harsh in Russia, and the Russians set fire to Moscow, Russia's capital, so that Napoleon would have nothing to conquer. With no protection from the cold and nothing for the soldiers to eat, Napoleon's troops were forced to retreat to France. The distance from Moscow to France was so great that only 10,000 out of Napoleon's 600,000 soldiers survived. The survivors had become so weak that they could not defend France from its powerful enemies. Great Britain, Prussia, Sweden, and Austria were able to invade Paris on March 31, 1814. The leaders of these countries forced Napoleon to give up the French throne. They sent him to live forever on the tiny island of Elba in the Mediterranean Sea. Napoleon was beaten, but not defeated. He and his followers escaped from Elba and returned to France on March 20, 1815. In a matter of months, he rebuilt the French army and became an emperor for the second time. But the leaders of Great Britain, Russia, Prussia, and Austria did not want to give Napoleon another chance to conquer Europe. These four nations joined forces, and in June 1815, they beat Napoleon's army at Waterloo, in the country known as Belgium today. In his second term on the throne of France, Napoleon ruled for only 100 days. On June 22, 1815, the Allies forced Napoleon to give up the French throne for good and sent him to the island of St. Helena in the South Atlantic Ocean for the rest of his life. The French Revolution enabled Napoleon to hold more power than anyone else living in the 18th and 19th centuries. He reformed French law and built an empire. But instead of spreading the revolution's message of liberty and equality, he tried to control the destinies of other countries and rule their people. For that, his life ended in exile.
Now, France had large holdings of land in the New World. The colony of Santo Domingo, now known as Haiti, was previously a slave colony. And this former French colony rebelled against France. They were being subjugated. They were being used to grow cash crops on plantations. They no longer wanted to be under the dominion of France. And so when they rebelled, France essentially, Napoleon gave up on territories in the Americas, saying, it's not worth it. It's not worth it. And so he sold off all lands west of the Appalachians to the young United States. In fact, Thomas Jefferson brokered this deal and for $15 million purchased from France, from Napoleon, all the lands west of the Appalachians, now called the Louisiana Purchase. His goal was really to raise money because he is now at war with much of Western Europe. And he is attempting to conquer and to hold Western Europe. And so, number one, this was a great deal for the United States because we doubled our territory for $15 million. Number two, it did provide finances for France. Because Napoleon was busy trying to conquer Europe. Meanwhile, Britain, Russia, Austria, and Sweden have all joined forces against Napoleon. And he beats them all. All of these different countries have ganged up against France, and Napoleon outsmarts and crushes them all and forces Austria, Russia, and Sweden to sign peace treaties and to become tributaries of the new French Empire.
France is surrounded by enemies. Afraid the spirit of revolution will spread, Britain is spoiling for a fight. In Italy, France is already at war with Austria, who is allied with Russia. By April 1797, Napoleon has driven the Austrians back to within 75 miles of Vienna and secured an armistice. The peace treaty he negotiates will give France control of thousands of miles of territory from Belgium to Greece. Napoleon has defeated an empire and changed the map of Europe. Napoleon's old allies, including his brother Lucien, stage a coup. Backed by Napoleon's troops, they seize control of the government without firing a shot. Within a month, the ideals of the French Revolution will be swept away, and the leadership of France will fall on the shoulders of one man. In February 1800, the dictatorship of Napoleon begins. After years of war and regimes riddled with corruption and incompetence, Napoleon's first task is to restore order. He streamlines the government, turning it into an efficient military machine. He straightens out the country's finances by creating the National Bank of France. He simplifies the legal system with a new set of civil laws. The Code Napoleon regulates virtually every aspect of life. Though not a believer, he reopens the churches, banned during the Revolution. In 1802, a grateful nation appoints him head of state for life. A vote is taken to replace the Republic with an empire modeled after Charlemagne's 1,000 years earlier. Now Napoleon is only a step away from a throne. On December 2nd, 1804, at the Cathedral of Notre Dame in Paris, the coronation is held. Dressed in the sumptuous cloak of royalty, Napoleon has brought Pope Pius VII from Rome to preside. But at the crucial moment, Napoleon astounds the Pope by taking the crown out of his hands and placing it on his own head. Then the Emperor of France makes Josephine his Empress. The self-styled Roman Emperor is master of all France. By age 40, Napoleon Bonaparte's empire has reached its zenith. He controls the destiny of 70 million people by force of will and personality. But without an heir, the empire is doomed. His marriage to Josephine has spawned countless rumors of infidelity, but no offspring. After a terrible fall from a balcony years earlier, she's unable to bear children. In April 1810, Napoleon marries Marie-Louise, the pretty 18-year-old daughter of his former enemy, the Emperor of Austria. Within a year, she gives birth to a son. Overjoyed, his father dubs him the King of Rome. His birthright will be a capital worthy of an empire. Paris, Napoleon decrees, will be something fabulous and unprecedented. He commissions 3 new bridges over the Seine and 2 new monuments. The Arc du Carrousel commemorates the heroic achievements of his Grande Armée. But while Paris glitters, Napoleon's own luster is fading. In a series of paintings, Francisco Goya documents the horrors of French occupation in Spain. In Paris, discontent is also growing. Feeding Napoleon's ambitions has cost France untold millions and an appalling number of lives. Now many believe the price is too high. After several assassination attempts, the pressure is mounting. For Napoleon, winning becomes an obsession. When he plays chess with his friends, he cheats. Convinced he's infallible, he'll soon make one of the biggest mistakes of his life.
But one country was never quite conquered by the French armies, and that was the nation of Britain. As an island country, Britain has been safeguarded from so many conflicts throughout history. Because to land on this island, the French would have to first defeat the British Navy to secure safe passage across the British Channel. But the British, meanwhile, have the world's most powerful navy. And so they defeat the French Navy at the Battle of Trafalgar. This is one of those turning points. Had the French won the Battle of Trafalgar, they perhaps could have conquered all of Western Europe, because this defeat forced Napoleon to give up his plans of invading Britain. And so he looks to find other ways to control Great Britain. And I wanted to show you, just in summary, how the war's looking so far. Here's the French Empire as of 1805. Here are the areas controlled by Napoleon. You see, he has conquered and defeated Spain, Austria, Prussia, Italy. And you can see these significant battles. For example, the Battle of Trafalgar. In this battle, you see the French and Spanish fleets trying to get to Gibraltar, this narrow entrance to the Mediterranean Sea. You can also see the British fleet. It just absolutely flanking the French armies.
But he wasn't master of the sea. His opponent was the British Admiral Horatio Nelson. Like Napoleon, Nelson was a man whose daring and skill won him rapid promotion through the ranks. Throughout 1805, Nelson chased the French fleet, finally bringing them to battle on October 21st near Cape Trafalgar. Nelson ignored the tradition of drawing alongside enemy ships to exchange broadsides. He invented a new tactic, the melee, giving his captains free rein among the French ships. In the mayhem that followed, the superior captain secured British victory. But Nelson was killed, shot by a French sniper at his moment of triumph over the French Navy. Napoleon continued to be master of land until he decided to invade Russia. The Russian campaign of 1812 ended in disaster when winter set in. Napoleon's army suffered 300,000 casualties. Most froze or starved to death. But Napoleon Bonaparte would not be finished off easily. He'd already fought more battles and won more victories than Alexander the Great, Hannibal, and Julius Caesar combined. Though he lost the Russian campaign, he would be back.
And so, with Napoleon's victories on land, he now controls all of Western Europe, except for Great Britain, Portugal, Sweden, and the Ottomans. All other countries are now part of the French Empire. He installs puppet rulers in some of these countries, forms alliances with others, and the high water mark of the French Empire is 1812. That date is significant because actually America goes to war with Great Britain in 1812. Great Britain burns the White House to the ground. The president is forced to flee Washington, D.C. But the British go, not worth it. We have this mess to deal with Napoleon. And so because of that, because of Napoleon, it's probably one of the big reasons we got to keep our country.